Let's go ahead and find our seats. Welcome back. Well, I called home during the break, and my oldest was throwing up, and my youngest was happy. So they did like a role reversal. So I don't know how that worked out, but always good. Well, I hope this first session was at least beneficial and at least casting a little bit of the vision. Like I said, for years, I felt like I would see glimpses of this. We would have a person like myself come in, or I would read something, and I would just realize that we had this disconnect. But like I said, when we first started doing this, it wasn't received with arms wide open initially. The students really enjoyed it because I think for years they were always wrestling but not able to articulate that they wanted the connection. We would talk about, hey, let's talk about the book of Romans, and they're going, let's talk about dating, because that's really where I'm struggling, is dating. Romans is good, but how does Romans help me understand dating? How does the New Testament help me understand a relationship with my mom and my dad? And so really what I always looked at was somewhat of reverse integration in my classroom, the Bible classroom, where I was saying, hey, let's take the things that you're dealing with and let's bring scripture to that. And so we would really just try to adopt that. But when we first started doing this, there was some concerned parents out there. There were parents who had pictures or an idea of what we were going to be doing that wouldn't look like we had been doing. So it was a huge paradigm shift. And it's really hard to argue with, teaching the Bible. But my problem wasn't that we were teaching the Bible, it's that we weren't connecting the Bible to where our students were at. And that's where I felt like we needed to make a better bridge. And so we started to do this in 2000 and I think it was 2012, first stages. And so the first couple weeks of doing this, my inbox is getting filled with parents. Some were positive comments, some were not as positive. And one parent emailed me, and she very upset about something that had happened in the school, and so that was kind of her soapbox. And then at the end of it, she emailed and said, why are we so focused on these kids' heads? We need to reach their hearts. And I wisely did not respond to that email initially, and I just kind of let it sit for a couple days, and I just thought through it and prayed through it, and eventually I got a chance to talk to her. But what I expressed to her is that you have to understand that the heart is a muscle. People do what they do because it goes through their brain. And when the New Testament understanding of a heart isn't just that it was the center of a person's being, it was, and really so in essence what they were saying is that this is out of the thoughts of the mind. And I wanted her to understand that your son made a bad decision because he thought he was making a good decision. And we've got to rewire the way he was thinking. And so conversations like that, we put on a parent training. We had about 80 people come out to our parent training, which was pretty big for our school. We didn't have a lot of, we usually didn't get 80 parents come to our association meeting. And we had about 200 views online. And so we were getting good traction with this. And one of our victory stories was we had one of our history teachers, and he was kind of the proponent of, I don't think we're going in the right direction. I don't think that this is the way to go. And he really feared that we were really going to start to worship culture instead of evaluate culture. And he sent me this very long email with several reasons why we shouldn't go in this direction. And just to kind of bring it full circle, last year when I left, we were doing our last in-service before summer started, and he did a in-service on the Big History Project, if any of you are familiar with that. It's a project funded by Bill Gates and several other humanist organizations. And so he was kind of going through this from a worldview perspective on history. And so I pulled him aside afterwards, and I said, hey, we talked a lot, but we didn't really talk candidly. And I said, hey, 4 years ago, you weren't on board with this. I said, and now you just did a presentation on history and worldview. I said, where are you at? And he said, I'm totally on board. He said, I see the impact it's had on our students. I see the impact it's had on our classrooms. And so for those of you that are here today and you're kind of dipping your toe, or maybe you're just kind of here kind of experiencing this for the first time, and you're kind of going, man, this sounds really good and it sounds really scary. I promise you that it is both. It is really good and it is really scary, because you're going to have things come up in the classroom that you're like, whoa, we are not about to talk about that. And you're going to have kids ask questions, and you're going to be like, whoa, I don't know if this is the right spot, but I would encourage you to push boundaries on that and to really challenge, because what I found is that a lot of times in Christian education, we play it really, really safe. And it sounds really nice, and we say, well, we're only going to talk about these certain things, but we have to realize our kids are struggling. There are issues that they're wrestling with, and if we don't wrestle with them, if we don't get messy with them, if we don't help them understand, we're really being selfish. I mean, I've sat in those administration meetings when we would make decisions, and I'm going, the only reason we're doing this is because we're scared. It's the only reason we're not talking about these issues. And so we had chapels that we really, it was like, I'm like, okay, we're having this chapel tomorrow, and my resignation letter was right there next to it, I'm like, and I told the board, I said, I'm willing to put it on the line because I believe this is where our students are at. So our first one, we had a chapel, and we talked about same-sex relationship. But we didn't talk about it from a biblical approach, because once again, that's pretty safe. That's pretty safe to go, here's your 6 verses in the Bible, here's your 3 New Testament verses that really specifically address it. What we did is we got a panel of kind of teachers and people, influential people in the school, and we sat down and we said, okay, we all agree that we think the Bible teaches this. Now, what do we do with this? Are you going to the wedding? Yeah, I'm going to the wedding. Are you going to the wedding? No, I'm not going to the wedding. Are you going to the reception? I'll go to the reception. And the kids got to see us think through this and wrestle through this. And we got to see teachers disagree and say, no, I think you're sending the wrong message. I think you're sending the wrong. And we got to see it. And, it was great conversation. I mean, we ended up, our chapels were usually about, 40 minutes long. This was 2 hours long, and you could hear a pin drop. The kids loved it because it was real. It was authentic. It's where they were at. But it was scary. 2 days later, I'm in Atlanta. I'm at a conference, and I get a phone call. It's a concerned parent. I don't think you did a very good job at chapel the other day. I said, I've been waiting for your phone call. I knew it was coming. I go to the board meeting, and the board, it was great because our president, who, that was his job to be the president, he's like, hey, we got this concerned parent. But it was great because majority of our board members had kids that were on the high school, and they just went down the line. My son loved it. My daughter loved it. My son loved it. My daughter loved it. They just kept saying, man, that's exactly what we do. And I said, well, I'm only doing one a year because I can't take it. I said, so the next year we did one on abortion, and we brought in a medical doctor, we brought in a local pastor, we brought in some people on staff, and we did the same thing. 2 hours, could hear a pin drop. We walked through it with the kids. Put my resignation letter right there again. I said, we've got to be willing to do this. Because if we're willing to send people to foreign countries, if we're willing to tell missionaries to go into harm's way, we have to be willing in the classroom to go to those places. And here's the thing, you're going to say things that are wrong. You're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes. But we cannot be afraid to make those mistakes with these kids. There's got to be wisdom. There's got to be prayer. There's got to be planning. You've got to have your administration on board. I would say that the biggest success we had as a school is that our administration was on board. If your administration is not on board, you have no chance for this because you're going to get pushback. You're going to get people just saying, why don't you just teach the Bible? When I was in school, we taught the Bible. We taught the stories. We taught the New Testament. We taught it, and everything worked out fine. But I would say the culture has changed. That, 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was this value that was placed in authority. There was value that was placed in the scriptures. There was value that was placed in the pulpit. I don't think that exists as much anymore. I think our students are having to wrestle with this and go, who do I believe to be true? And if we're not willing to get messy with our students, if we're not willing to get honest with our students, we're going to continue to get the same results. Actually, scratch that. We're going to get worse results. One of my favorite verses is in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32. It says, the sons of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. My question is, what does the church need to be doing today? As we survey the landscape, as we look at what's going on in culture, what do we need to help our kids? And so if you're thinking right now, what are the things that you think your kids are talking about? What are they talking about in the hallway? And then the second they step into your classroom, they stop talking. I'd be like, hey, no, keep talking about that. Let's go. No, it's okay. No, seriously. You're watching it. You're talking about it. You're listening to it. Let's talk about it. So we would put some songs up, and I would do the best I could to bleep out some of the lyrics, So several years ago, and this is my contention, my opinion more than anything, but I think that one of the most influential songs for the same-sex movement was a song by Macklemore called Same Love. How many of you have ever heard that song before? I guarantee every single student. So the first day of class, my students are walking, they're freshmen, and so they're new to the high school, they're new to PCS. They're walking in, and they're walking down the hallway, and the Bible teacher, spiritual life director, is playing Same Love as they walk into the classroom. And they're kind of like, can we do this? And they're like, this is cool, but it's kind of weird. And they're like, I'm like, what do you guys think? And they're like trying not to, move to it, because then that means they know the song. And I'm like, you know the song, don't you? Like, no. And I'm like, yeah, you do. And they're like, yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it's got over 100 million views. I don't even know what it's up to now. 100 million views. I said, this is having an impact. So let's talk about this. Because here's the thing, if you're listening to this, and if Macklemore has a worldview, and he's espousing his worldview in this song, and it's a catchy song, and it's a popular song, and when he did it at the VMAs or the Grammys, I don't remember where he did it, they had 30 couples, some same-sex, some opposite sex, all get married, and you look at this celebration that was conducted by Queen Latifah, you're looking at this and you're going, wow, this is a really crazy spectacle, but it seems like everybody's really cool with it, but my Bible teacher's not cool with it, and every time I try to bring it up, he won't talk about it. See, we send a message to our students. Subtly, we send a message that, one, we don't care, or we're not listening, or we don't have an answer to their question. And I think we need to be willing to do that. Now, there's a couple of choice words in that song, so I would have to pause it intentionally. I did this for our staff in an in-service, very similar to this, and it was funny because I kept pausing it, or I kept hitting the mute button, but a couple of times I accidentally paused it when the bad word would come up, and so I would wait a little bit, but really I just paused it, so I teed it up, so it'd be like bam, and I'm like, oh, so I got out my resignation again, and I'm like, But it was great because I had a great friend and a colleague and a teacher, and her husband was a pastor, and I was like, I'm so sorry, I'm not, I'm trying to make this plea for worldview, and I'm like destroying it by the thing I didn't want them to hear, I exposed, and she's like, Joe, we've all heard it. The kids have heard it, they know it. I said, don't, just keep pushing forward, keep doing what you're doing, keep having those conversations. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make things that come up, and you're going to be like, gosh, man, we missed it on that one. And you probably did miss it on that one, but we've got to push the ball forward because our kids need us to push the ball forward. This is probably an extreme analogy, but for me, I've always thought, there are people that go into the 1040 window and they give their lives. There are people that go into countries that are ridden with AIDS. I can have the courage to go into my classroom and really talk about some of these things, and you're going to make mistakes. Earlier, I referenced the events in Ferguson, and I was in Charlotte at school, and I was watching all this kind of unfold on the TV, and so just watching this and praying about it, and watching it and praying about it, and a month later I came back and the decision came out for the police officer, and so it was big news, national news, and so I'm watching on TV, and my wife, I think she cursed me with this. She goes, do you think your students will ask you about that tomorrow? I said, nah. I just don't think so. I don't think it's really on their radar too much. And so we go into my second hour class, Pure Christian School, about 800 students, high school, probably about 270, and I'd say probably 60 of our students are probably African American. So, it's grown every year, which has just been really awesome. In my second hour, I had a proponent. A lot of my students were African Americans. And I had one student, Jada, hilarious student. I don't think she ever paid attention, but she's just a hilarious student, just such a great kid. And so we're starting class, and she's kind of in the back left corner, and she goes, Miss Parrish, did you hear about Ferguson last night? I said, yeah, I did. And she goes, what do you think about it? And I'm thinking, I am not touching this with a 10-foot pole. I am not talking about this. And so I don't even know what I said. I said something, I changed the subject, and we had just finished talking about logical fallacies. And she goes, so the class settles down and sits down, and she goes, Miss Parrish, would that be an example of a red herring? Because you totally avoided my question. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, the one time you pay attention. I'm like, you remember that. And I said, that's fair. I said, here's what I think. And we spent the next 45 minutes unpacking And they were talking to me, and I was talking to them, and I was pulling out scripture, and I was saying, well, what do you think about this? And we prayed together, and we talked together, and then the class ended, and some of my students left, and some of the students stayed, and we just kept talking, we just kept praying. And one of the girls that was in her class, her dad was a local pastor, and he's kind of one of the people that shepherded me and mentored me and kind of was helping me understand race issues in America. And so we were talking. A couple weeks later, he comes up and he goes, hey, I just want to let you know that conversation meant a lot to my daughter. And I said, man, that was the scariest day of my life. I said, felt so ill-prepared. I felt like I was the worst person to have that conversation as a white male. And I said, I felt like I was the best person to have that conversation. And so then the next year, our chapel, we did a race issue, and we brought in local pastors. We brought in African-American pastors. We brought in Caucasian pastors. We brought in people from staff, and we just wrestled with these ideas. And once again, I put my resignation letter right there, and I said, I'm putting it on the line.